Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely legendary. We are looking at one of the most profound and widely celebrated commencement speeches ever given. In just about 15 minutes, the brilliant leader and Apple founder, Steve Jobs, managed to distill 50 years of an incredibly wild, extraordinary life into a few deeply powerful lessons. Seriously, it's the kind of message that can spark a massive shift in how you view your own journey, and we're going to break it all down for you today. Okay, let's dive into this. I never graduated from any college. It's a pretty wild paradox, isn't it? Think about it. You have a famous college dropout standing at a graduation ceremony delivering the commencement address at Stanford University, which is literally one of the most prestigious institutions on the planet. He even joked during the speech that this was the closest he had ever actually gotten to a college graduation. To really get the most out of his message, we're going to follow his exact roadmap. He explicitly structured his thoughts around three distinct life stories. First, his time as a dropout at Stanford. Second, connecting the dots. Third, love and loss. Fourth, the bitter truth of death. And finally, his famous parting words, stay hungry, stay foolish. So let's jump right into section 1. A dropout at Stanford. The sheer chaos of his early beginnings actually started before he was even born. See, his biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she was absolutely adamant that he be adopted by college graduates. But at the very last minute, the original adoptive parents backed out because they decided they wanted a girl. So he ended up going to a working-class couple who hadn't graduated college. In fact, his adoptive dad hadn't even finished high school. His biological mom only signed the adoption papers when they promised, like really promised, that he would eventually go to college. Fast forward 17 years, and he did go. But he naively chose a school that was almost as expensive as Stanford. After just 6 months, he had burned through his parents' entire life savings. And honestly, he couldn't see the value in what he was learning. So he made the incredibly difficult and terrifying decision to drop out.
That brings us to section 2, connecting the dots. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how trusting the trajectory of your life actually works in practice.
Because he dropped out, he didn't have to take those required normal classes anymore. He was totally free to just drop in on whatever looked interesting. And over the next 18 months, he decided to take a calligraphy class at Reed College, which was famous at the time for having these beautiful hand-drawn posters all over campus. He learned all about serif and sans serif typefaces and the tiny, meticulous spaces between different letter combinations. It was beautiful, historical, and deeply artistic. Now, at the time, it seemed completely useless for his future. But check this out. 10 years later, when they were designing the very first Macintosh computer, it all came rushing back to him. He built all of that stunning typography directly into the Mac, making it the very first personal computer with proportionally spaced fonts, something Windows later just copied.
But we really can't gloss over the reality of those 18 months. Dropping out wasn't some romantic adventure. It was a gritty, physical struggle. He didn't have a dorm room, so he was literally sleeping on the floors of his friends' rooms. He returned glass Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits just to buy food. And every single Sunday, he would walk 7 miles across town just to get one good, hot, full meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. It was harsh, for sure, but he loved it because he was fiercely following his curiosity. Which brings us to the absolute core lesson of this first story. Look at this brilliant contrast. Looking forward versus looking backward. Jobs emphasized that it was utterly impossible to connect those dots when he was just a kid sitting in that calligraphy class, but looking backward 10 years later, it made perfect sense. You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. Therefore, you just have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to believe in something, your gut, your destiny, life, karma, whatever it is. Because believing the dots will connect down the road is exactly what gives you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you way off the well-worn path. Moving right along to section 3, love and loss. $2 billion. The emotional tone of his life shifted super dramatically here, from those early struggles to just massive, explosive success. Jobs found what he loved to do early in life. He and his partner started Apple in his father's garage when he was just 20 years old. They worked relentlessly, and in just 10 years, Apple blew up from 2 kids in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. And they had just released their absolute finest creation, the Macintosh. But then, right at the peak, he got hit with this stark reality, fired at age 30. I mean, how do you even get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, they hired an executive who Jobs thought was smart enough to run the company with him. For the first year, things went pretty well, but then their visions for the future completely diverged. They clashed hard, and the board of directors actually sided with the executive. Just like that, at 30 years old, Jobs was out. The entire focus of his adult life was just gone. He felt like a massive public failure, and for a few months, he honestly didn't know what to do. He even thought about running away from Silicon Valley. However, this devastating loss turned out to be a massive disguised blessing. The heavy and tense burden of being successful was suddenly replaced by the absolute lightness of being a beginner again. He felt completely freed, and he entered the most intensely creative period of his life. Over the next 5 years, he started a company named Next and another company named Pixar, which, as we know, went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story. In a completely remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, returning Jobs right back to Apple, where the technology developed at Next drove Apple's incredible renaissance. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly in this quote. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. Jobs stated that getting fired was a bitter-tasting medicine, but the patient absolutely needed it. He realized he still completely loved his work, despite being rejected. His powerful advice here is that if you haven't found what you love yet, keep looking. Do not settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know exactly when you find it, and it only gets better as the years roll on.
Now we arrive at Section 4, Death, a Bitter Truth.
We're transitioning into what is definitely the darkest, but honestly the most clarifying chapter of his life. Ask yourself right now, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? When Jobs was 17, he read a quote that inspired him to look in the mirror every single morning for 33 years and ask himself this exact question. Whenever the answer was no for too many days in a row, he knew he immediately needed to change something. Remembering that you are going to die is the single best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There's no reason not to follow your heart.
This concept of mortality became terrifyingly real for him. He had a scan at 7:30 one morning and was diagnosed with a tumor on his pancreas. The doctors told him it was almost certainly an incurable type of cancer, giving him just 3 to 6 months to live. They advised him to go home and get his affairs in order, which is the medical code for prepare to die. Imagine the sheer emotional weight of that. He lived with that absolute death sentence all day until a biopsy that evening. They put an endoscope down his throat, into his stomach, and took cells from his pancreas. And when the doctors looked under the microscope, they literally started crying. It turned out it was a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that was actually curable with surgery. Having brushed so incredibly close with death, his perspective sharpened immensely. He warned strongly against living in dogma, which means living with the results of other people's thinking. Because our time is strictly limited, we just cannot afford to waste it living someone else's life. He called death life's ultimate invention because it clears out the old to make way for the new. Therefore, you must strip away the external noise, the expectations, and the pride, and instead strictly follow your intuition. Your heart and your inner voice somehow already know exactly what you truly want to become. Which brings us to the climax of our explainer, Section 5, Stay Hungry, Stay Foolish. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what the first part of his famous mantra means. Stay hungry. What does that actually look like? It is the relentless hunger and drive to do something meaningful and achieve more. It's about keeping that fire burning inside you constantly. It means never getting too comfortable with your past successes and always looking for the next way you can contribute, build, or grow. And the second half, stay foolish. Now, this doesn't mean making silly mistakes. Rather, it's about having the deep humility to admit you don't know everything. It's about keeping your mind wide open to continuous learning. The exact moment you believe you are an absolute expert who knows everything, you instantly stop learning anything new. You have to maintain that beginner's mindset, the very same lightweight mindset that sparked a massive creative rebirth when Jobs was fired from Apple. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Which brings us to the end of our journey today, leading you with this truly provocative final thought. How will you connect the dots of your life? You can't see the future, but you do have your intuition, your hunger, and your willingness to learn. What steps are you taking today that will make perfect sense when you look back 10 years from now? Keep looking, don't settle, and trust that the dots will connect. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it gives you the courage to follow your own inner voice.